Hello and welcome everyone to my Commander deck tech on Vaevictis Asmadi the Dire. This is a Jund sacrifice deck built around using and abusing the commander's ability. Vaevictis Asmadi's ability reads, whenever Vaevictis Asmadi the Dire attacks, for each player choose target permanent that player controls. Those players sacrifice those permanents, and each player sacrifice a permanent this way reveals the top card of their library, and puts it on the battlefield if it's a permanent. So why should you use Vaevictis Asmadi? The sacrifice theme is an incredibly powerful archetype in Commander, especially in the Jund color pairing, where commanders like Prosh, Shattergame Brothers, and Kresh have already proven that the Jund sacrifice deck can be a powerful strategy. So why use Vaevictis Asmadi over the other Jund sacrifice commanders? Prosh is an incredibly powerful commander, so powerful that he ascends past the sacrifice deck into a competitive food chain deck. If you sit down for a game and whip out Prosh, your opponents have to assume that you're playing the most powerful version of Prosh, which is a very high ceiling. In my opinion, playing Prosh as just a sacrifice deck is purposely nerfing your deck, and not letting Prosh live up to its full potential. Shattergame Brothers is another Jund commander based on the sacrifice archetype. Shattergame Brothers is more of a control version of this archetype, abusing recurable creatures, artifacts, and enchantments to keep your opponents from having anything significant on their battlefield. However, I find that the Brothers' ability is too mana intensive, and the recurable permanents are more gimmicky than actually good. Kresh the Blood Braided is what I would consider the definitive sacrifice commander, especially for Jund. I recommend using Kresh if you want to play a generic sacrifice deck, but if you want to use a sacrifice deck with the spice of chaos, I'd recommend Vaevictis Asmadi the Dire. So what archetypes and strategies did I incorporate in my build of this deck? I used some recursion and easily recurable permanents as sacrifice fodder for Vaevictis Asmadi's ability. I incorporated some instant speed hate because I run almost no instants in the deck, since the deck doesn't want to use very many instants and sorceries. I also added a bit of top deck manipulation to take advantage of Vaevictis Asmadi's ability. Overall, the deck runs as a generic Jund deck with synergies to help take advantage of Vaevictis Asmadi's ability. Ramp is incredibly powerful and necessary for any commander deck, and since this deck is running green, we get access to the best ramp available in Commander. Arbor Elf, Birds of Paradise, Elves of Deep Shadow, Elvish Mystic, Fyndhorn Elves, and Llanowar Elves are all 1 CMC mana dorks that are a great start to any game, and they can be decent sacrifice fodder for Vaevictis Asmadi's ability. Deathrite Shaman is another 1 CMC mana dork that has extra utility with its Graveyard Hate and Life Gain and Drain abilities. Oracle of Moldiah is ramp that gives you a peek at the top of your library, so you have some intel for your Asmadi flips. Sakura Tribe Elder is the creature version of Rampant Growth. He also works as a decent blocker that you can sacrifice before damage to get its effect. Not only does Solemn Simulacrum ramp you, he also makes great sacrifice fodder for Vaevictis Asmadi since you draw a card when he dies. Vorinclex Voice of Hunger is one of the 3 unholy trinity of Praetors in this deck. This card doubles your mana while creating a nightmare for your opponent's mana. Yavimaya Elder is an incredibly efficient way to get lands out of your deck, while also being a solid sacrifice target for Vaevictis. Creatures will be dying constantly, so Black Market will get you a decent chunk of mana on each of your turns. Revel in Riches works a lot like Black Market. It also gives you a win condition if your opponents are dumb enough to let you build up to 10 treasures. I like using Coalition Relic in decks where the commanders are 5 or 6 mana, so you can play it, put a charge counter on it, then you should have 5 mana on your next turn, or 6 mana if you play a land too. Felwar Stone is the best 2 CMC mana rock available in Commander. It usually taps for all colors and comes into play untapped, something no other 2 CMC mana rock is capable of doing. Mana Vault can quickly ramp you into Vaevictis, enabling you to play him on at least turn 3 if you hit your land drops. Then it becomes great sacrifice fodder for his ability. Sol Ring. It's Sol Ring. Vaevictis Asmadi gains card advantage by cheating in permanents from the top of your library. However, the deck, like any other, needs ways to draw cards. Atali Primal Storm has similar synergy to Vaevictis, benefiting from top deck manipulation, and the dino becomes much more powerful with haste, just like Vaevictis. Creatures should be dying frequently to Vaevictis Asmadi's ability, so you should be able to draw a decent chunk of cards from Harvester Souls. Lurking Predators is a green Ristic study. There are 29 creatures in the deck, so you should be able to cheat a decent amount of creatures into play, especially if you stack the deck using top deck manipulation. Phyrexian Arena is an excellent card draw spell that goes in every deck running black. Sylvan Library can draw you extra cards during your draw step for a payment of 4 life per card. Skull Clamp gives you card draw whenever the equipped creature dies, which will likely happen when sacrificing the equipped creature to Vaevictis. Stacking the top of your library is incredibly important. It gives you some much needed information on what's on top of your deck for Vaevictis Asmadi's ability. Not only can Sylvan Library draw you extra cards, it also lets you stack the top of your deck for Vaevictis. Miri's Guile is the mini Sylvan Library that costs half the mana but doesn't give you the option to draw additional cards. Scroll Rack lets you stack the top of your deck, putting high CMC cards from your hand on top of your library for Vaevictis to cheat into play. Sensei's Divining Top is normally just a solid card draw manipulation artifact to help your draws. However, it becomes insanely powerful in this deck, since manipulating the top of your deck almost becomes broken with Vaevictis. Tutors are an important part of any commander deck, and top of the deck tutors become even better in this deck. Brutalizer Exarch is a put on top of the deck tutor attached to a permanent. Any tutor that puts a creature on top of your deck is really silly with Lurking Predators. Just search for an overpowered creature and either let your opponents trigger Lurking Predators, or just keep your opponents from casting spells until you draw that overpowered creature. Then you just play it from your hand anyways. Liliana Vest is a put on top of the deck tutor that can be used multiple times. Demonic Tutor is the most powerful card in Commander and should be played in every deck running black. This deck is built around sacrificing your creatures, so the sacrifice cost of Diabolic Intent becomes less taxing in this deck than other decks. This deck manages to make Vampiric Tutor, an already amazing card, even better. Worldly Tutor is another put on top of the deck tutor that can only get creatures, but creatures are usually what you want to grab with your tutors anyways in this deck. The best way to get card advantage in this deck is through Vaevictis Asmadi's ability to target a permanent that can be easily recurred. Double the squee, double the trouble. Squees are great sacrifice fodder for Vaevictis. You can pay just 3 mana to get Drownyard Temple back to the battlefield from your graveyard after you've sacrificed it. Rancor is the most efficient sacrifice fodder in the deck since it's just 1 mana. Spine of Ishsaw is a removal spell that's great as sacrifice fodder. The deck has a little bit of a graveyard recursion sub-theme, since we want to mitigate the sacrifice cost of Vaevictis Asmadi's ability. Eternal Witness is a stereotypical solid graveyard recursion permanent that should be played in any deck that wants to recur cards from their graveyard. Oftentimes you will need to sacrifice lands to Asmadi's ability, and Ramunap Excavator helps to mitigate that problem. Sheoldred Whispering One is the second of the 3 unholy trinity of Praetors in this deck. She puts even more pressure on your opponent's board when paired up with Vaevictis, and she can recur creatures that you sacrifice to Vaevictis. Volrath's Stronghold is graveyard recursion that sets you up for Asmadi flips. Journey to Eternity negates 1 sacrifice, and gets you a land that lets you recur your creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield. Phyrexian Reclamation is one of the most efficient and effective continual graveyard recursion spells in Commander. Haste is absolutely necessary for this deck, since the commander triggers on attack, and you need as many Asmadi flips as possible throughout the game. Urbras the Hidden is the final part of the unholy trinity of Praetors playable in this deck. He does exactly what this deck needs. He gives all your creatures haste and makes your opponent's creatures come to play tapped, leaving them more open to attack. Xenagos God of Revels gives Vaevictis Asmadi haste and doubles his power and toughness, making commander damage kills much more easier to achieve. Hall of the Bandit Lord is an incredibly efficient way of giving haste with a low opportunity cost since it's a land. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots are some of the best ways to give haste and protect your commander in any deck, and as I said, giving haste to Vaevictis Asmadi is incredibly important for this deck to operate properly, and giving some protection from your commander is a huge benefit as well. Removal is necessary for just about every deck to keep your opponents in check from doing anything too broken. Vaevictis Asmadi the Dire is obviously the best way to remove troublesome permanents in its deck, since he can target any permanent, and target one for each opponent. You usually want to use Brutalize or Exarch to tutor, however it can be used as a removal spell as well. Shieldred Whispering One forces your opponents to sacrifice a creature on their upkeep. Blasphemous Act is the only 1-mana board wiping commander. It's an auto-include in any deck running red. Crux of Fate wipes the board while keeping your commander unscathed, unless if you have to use the Destroy All Dragons mode for whatever reason. You often have to sacrifice a creature to Vaevictis' ability, so Dictated Erebos should put a ton of pressure on your opponent's boards, especially in conjunction with Vaevictis. Spine of Ishsaw is a lot of mana for a single targeted removal spell, but it becomes a powerful recurable removal spell if you have a way to sacrifice it, which our commander is so kind to provide. Decks not playing blue often have trouble against blue decks, since you can't counter spells. However, the other colors do have some tools to combat this problem. This deck actually plays no cards that need to be played at instant speed, so the deck can get away with universal instant speed hate. Like I said, the deck plays no cards in instant speed, so Dose on the Fallen Leaf ends up being a one-sided effect that makes many cards in your opponent's hand useless, especially counter spells. Sire of Insanity is one of the most brutal cards in this deck. This demon forces all players into top deck mode, and forces everyone to play the Vaevictis Asmadi game instead of normal Magic, a game where you have a distinct advantage over your opponents. Price of Glory severely punishes players attempting to play instants to the point where they will be so highly discouraged from playing cards at instant speed that they likely won't play them. Here are some of the best cards that you could cheat into play using Vaevictis Asmadi. Avenger of Zendikar is just a solid creature that creates an army when it enters the battlefield, and it ends up being a win condition when paired with Craterhoof Behemoth. Speaking of which, Craterhoof is a solid finisher as long as you have a decent amount of creatures on the battlefield. Atali Primal Storm is a solid creature that can give you card advantage. Harvester of Souls is another good flip that could draw you a decent chunk of cards. It That Betrays steals your opponent's permanents that they sacrifice to the variety of sacrifice effects in this deck, the main one being Vaevictis Asmadi. Your opponent should be sacrificing permanents quite frequently, so Mazorak Crawl Death Priest should pump your team up like crazy. Xenaghost God of Revels is a god that pumps up your creatures and gives them haste. Sire of Insanity can completely take your opponents out of the game. Shieldred, Urabrask, and Vornklex are the 3 Praetors available in the Jund color pairing. They are some of the most powerful creatures in Magic, especially in Commander. These are the cards that didn't fall under any of the previous categories. Creatures should be dying and being sacrificed quite often, so Blood Artist should do some good work for this deck. Vaevictis Asmadi's ability triggers when he attacks, so getting multiple combat steps using Aggravated Assault will prove to be useful and powerful in this deck. Mimic Vat is another card that benefits from your opponent's creatures dying. Here are the lands that are played in this deck. Blood Crypt, Overgrown Tomb, and Stomping Ground are the shocklands available in the Jund color pairing. Shocklands are great, especially since they're fetchable using the fetch lands. Speaking of which, Bloodstained Mire, Verdant Catacombs, and Wooded Foothills are the fetch lands in the Jund color pairing. Fetch lands are the best lands in Magic. They get the land that you need, and often more for the low cost of 1 life, and possibly another 2 if you grab a shockland and have it come into play untapped. Dragonskull Summit, Woodland Cemetery, and Rootbound Crag are the checklands in the Jund color pairing. Checklands are cheap price-wise and usually come into play untapped. Luxury Suite and Spire Garden are currently the only 2 Battlebond lands available in the Jund color pairing. Battlebond lands almost always come into play untapped in multiplayer Commander. They're basically original duels that you can't fetch. Grove of the Burn Willows is a come-into-play untapped dual land with a small downside of giving your opponents 1 life whenever you tap it for colored mana. City of Brass and Mana Confluence are excellent lands that should be played in every multicolored deck. The 1 life payment is well worth the cost for a redundant command tower. And of course you should play Command Tower in your deck too. Exotic Orchard and Reflecting Pool are 2 more lands that are basically redundant command towers, or at least untapped dual lands. Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth goes in every deck running black. It just makes your land base a little more consistent with almost no opportunity cost. Drownyard Temple is sacrifice fodder for Vaevictis attached to a land. Hall of the Bandit Lord is in the deck to give Vaevictis some much needed haste. Volrath Stronghold is some much needed graveyard recursion attached to a land. 11 forests, 2 mountains, and 6 swamps fill up the rest of the land base for the deck. I want to thank you for watching my deck tech on Vaevictis Asmadi the Dire. I'd appreciate it if you smash that like button, comment, and subscribe. And again, thank you for watching.